The new sun rose over Teotihuacan and refused to move. Its light reached the earth, its heat could be felt, but it remained fixed above the horizon, as if the machinery of the universe had stopped at the moment of ignition. According to a Nahua creation account, the gods understood what was missing. The sun required their deaths. Only after the gods were sacrificed could the fifth sun begin its journey across the sky. This was the world inherited by the Mexica, the people who built Tenochtitlan and became the dominant power of the Aztec Empire. A world already purchased with divine blood. Human beings did not enter it as innocent spectators. They inherited a debt. Rain fell because sacred forces were working. Maize emerged because the earth opened. The sun crossed the sky because something had paid for its movement. And payment did not last forever. Every sunrise renewed the obligation. This is the first distinction we have to preserve. The Mexica did not simply believe that their gods enjoyed killing. Sacrifice belonged to a much larger system of exchange. The gods had given themselves so life could exist, and humanity answered with food, flowers, incense, animals, personal blood, and, on particular occasions, human lives. The universe was not a gift. It was a loan with interest. That belief produced extraordinary poetry, disciplined ritual, public beauty, and a machinery of death powerful enough to stand at the center of an empire. The same hands that planted flowers could hold down a captive. To understand how both actions belong to one world, we have to climb the stairs of its most important temple. At the center of Tenochtitlan stood a double temple. One staircase led toward Huitzilopochtli, patron of the Mexica and a god bound to warfare and the sun. The other led toward Tlaloc, the ancient power of rain, storms, and agricultural fertility. War and water, captives and maize. The two requirements of imperial survival were built into the same stone body. The Templo Mayor was more than a place where worship happened. Its architecture transformed the capital into sacred geography. The southern side recalled Coatepec, the Serpent Mountain, where Huitzilopochtli was believed to have been born armed and ready for battle. At the foot of those stairs lay the enormous carved body of Coyolxauhqui, his defeated and dismembered sister. When the body of a sacrificed captive descended the staircase, myth was no longer a story about a distant past. It was happening again. On the northern side, offerings to Tlaloc contained shells, aquatic creatures, green stone, and objects drawn from landscapes far beyond the island city. Rain had to be requested, welcomed, and sometimes feared. The same force that filled the canals could flatten maize beneath a storm. Nothing essential was automatic. The temple made that lesson visible. The city stood between hunger and abundance, darkness and sunrise, defeat and imperial expansion. Ritual promised that these forces could be negotiated, but the gods did not always receive an object. Sometimes they received a person, and before that person died, something stranger could happen. For days, or for an entire year, the victim might cease to be treated as human. He became the god everyone was preparing to kill. A young captive walks through the streets playing a flute. People turn toward him. They offer flowers. They bow. He has been dressed as Tezcatlipoca, the powerful, unpredictable god associated with rulership, conflict, night, and the smoking mirror. In the ritual described by colonial-era Nahua informants, the captive was not merely an actor wearing a costume. He was an Xiptla, the living embodiment, image, or representative of the god. For months, he was fed well and trained to move with composure. His body had to appear without obvious physical defect. He carried flowers and smoked tobacco tubes. Near the end, He was given companions dressed as goddesses. Then the procession changed direction. He approached the temple, climbed alone, and broke one flute on each step. At the summit, priests opened his chest. The god had been honored by being made visible. The man had been honored by being destroyed. This is difficult to understand if we imagine a clean boundary between representation and reality. To the ritual participants, the costume did not simply conceal a prisoner. It changed what his body was allowed to mean. A human being could become sacred without becoming safe. That principle extended far beyond this ceremony. Images were clothed, fed, carried, renewed, buried, and sometimes broken. Priests pierced their own ears, tongues, or limbs, offering blood drawn from bodies that remained alive. Sacrifice existed on a spectrum, from incense and food to self-bleeding and death. Human sacrifice occupied its most extreme end, and it was real. Archaeology has made it impossible to dismiss the bodies as nothing more than Spanish propaganda. But the Spanish record created another problem. It taught the world to look at the Mexica through blood first, and everything else afterward. Spanish chroniclers described temples soaked in blood and gave enormous totals for the dead. Those numbers cannot simply be accepted. The conquerors had political and religious reasons to portray indigenous worship as demonic. Their accounts were written after invasion, through translation, fear, memory, Christian theology, and the need to justify conquest. But rejecting every colonial description creates a different lie. Beneath modern Mexico City, archaeologists have uncovered sacrificial stones, human remains bearing ritual modifications, offerings, skull racks, and part of the Huitzilopochtli, the great structure where pierced skulls were publicly displayed. The sacrifices happened. What remains disputed is their scale, frequency, and interpretation. Victims were not one uniform group. Many were captured warriors. Others were enslaved people or individuals selected for particular ceremonies. Some rites involved children offered in connection with Tlaloc and the arrival of rain, a fact that should not be softened into metaphor. Nor should it be used as permission to imagine an entire civilization as permanently intoxicated by violence. Most Mexica people spent their days farming, trading, preparing food, raising children, repairing canals, studying, arguing, composing songs, and trying to survive obligations imposed by family, neighborhood, temple, and state. The calendar brought ritual into those ordinary lives. Each festival changed the clothing, food, music, fasting, dancing, and offerings of the city. Then, on certain days, the same calendar placed a human body on the stone. This is where explanation becomes uncomfortable. Understanding why an act made sense does not make the act less terrible. It reveals something worse. A society does not need to lose all moral order before it can kill publicly. It only needs a moral order that explains why the killing is necessary. The Mexica did not invent human sacrifice. It existed in Mesoamerica long before their empire. What they built was a state capable of binding ritual, warfare, tribute, agriculture, and political authority into a single system. Captured warriors could become offerings. Successful capture brought status. Conquered cities delivered goods to the capital. Temple ceremonies displayed the reach of rulers who claimed responsibility for keeping both society and cosmos in order. Religion did not sit above politics like decoration. It entered the battlefield, the marketplace, the school, the kitchen, and the tax burden. At the Templo Mayor, the shrines of Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc faced the same plaza. One expressed the military power that brought tribute inward. The other guarded the rain and fertility that turned soil into food. Empire and cosmos reinforced each other. If military victory proved divine favor, then expansion could be described as sacred necessity. If sacrifice helped sustain the sun, then captives were not merely enemies. Their bodies entered an explanation of how tomorrow would arrive. That explanation benefited the gods. It also benefited the people who ruled in their names. This does not mean every ritual was cynical political theater. A ruler could believe in the gods and still use their demands. A priest could fear cosmic collapse and still serve an empire strengthened by that fear. Systems rarely divide themselves into sincere believers and cold manipulators. Usually, belief and power learn to breathe through the same lungs. By the time the Spanish entered Tenochtitlan in 1519, the Mexica had constructed a world in which obligation reached upward to the heavens and outward across conquered territory. Then, strangers arrived carrying a different god and their own machinery of sacred violence. The Spaniards looked at the temples and saw proof that the city belonged to the devil. The Mexica looked at the Spaniards and tried to place them inside signs, alliances, rivalries, and sacred expectations they already understood. Neither side encountered the other without a story prepared in advance. But only one side would write the official ending. Temples were destroyed. Sacred images were broken or buried. Christian churches rose over ceremonial ground. Epidemics killed on a scale no ritual knife could approach. Indigenous communities were baptized, reorganized, exploited, and never completely emptied of memory. The old religion did not disappear in a single afternoon. Pieces of it survived in language, agricultural practice, local ceremony, art, Catholic devotion, and the ground beneath Mexico City. The easiest conclusion would be that the Mexica were prisoners of a cruel belief. The world demanded blood, so they gave it blood. But their religion exposes a habit that outlived their gods. Human beings can turn sacrifice into evidence of virtue. Work until your body fails and call it loyalty. Send the young to die and call it national destiny. Destroy the dissenter and call it order. The altar changes, the sentence survives. Something must be paid, or the world will end. The Mexica answer was public, physical, and impossible to ignore. A body lay on the stone. Everyone could see the cost. Our sacrifices are often cleaner. The person disappears behind a statistic, a uniform, a contract, or a screen. The system keeps moving, and no one has to touch the heart. That may not make us less ritualistic, only less honest about the altar. Nothing disappears without a trace. Sometimes the trace is a skull beneath a modern street. Sometimes it is the thing we continue to feed because we are afraid to discover that the sun might rise without it.